If you loved your MSC cruise to the Caribbean or Mexico and you're thinking of booking MSC for a European cruise, stop. What you're about to book is not the same cruise line, and I'm going to prove it to you. By the end of this video, I'm going to tell you exactly which MSC ships in Europe are worth booking and which ones will have you regretting you ever even heard of MSC. I'm Gary with Optimal Cruising, bringing you fresh cruise advice, money-saving hacks, and secret strategies the cruise lines don't advertise. The first time I booked a cruise with MSC, I was like, what is an MSC? I mean, I'd been on a number of cruises with Royal Caribbean, Carnival, and Norwegian, but MSC? Never heard of them. And that's because, for the longest time, they weren't a player in the American marketplace. Europeans are well aware of MSC because they've been operating for decades in the European market. However, their strategy to penetrate the American market has brought them a lot of new fans, and particularly because of the cheap pricing and the relative good value you get for what you're paying. MSC's strategy to penetrate the American market is actually twofold. First, they're offering low pricing. They are cutting prices below what a typical Carnival or Royal Caribbean cruise will cost, and those are their main competitors. And on the other hand, they are deploying their newest, biggest, baddest ships in the American market in order to entice customers and win them over. With ships like the Seashore, the Seascape, the New World America, people are being wowed, and I was wowed. These are great ships, high-class interiors, great design features, a lot of activities, lots of specialty dining, a lot of options, all kinds of features with the pools and the water slides, and it's just a nice ship to be on. And MSC has been rather effective in this strategy. They are winning over new customers who have become loyal and repeat cruisers on MSC and even considering MSC for cruises outside of the American marketplace. And it is quite interesting how MSC is able to cut prices so much on their newest, latest, greatest ships and really beat out their competitors price-wise. And they're able to do this because they are a privately held company. They don't answer to a board of directors. They don't have to worry about how things affect their stock price. And they make a ton of money in shipping. They are a worldwide shipping empire, and they can use that money to build up their cruise line in the Americas, which is a gold mine for any cruise line. Now, if you've already sailed on MSC from a U.S. port, let me know in the comments what ship you sailed on and what your experience was, because I'm willing to bet for most of you, the experience was rather positive. But what do Europeans think about sailings on MSC? I'll be honest, after sailing the MSC fleet in the Americas, I was rather impressed. My first sailing was on the MSC Seashore, and it was a great ship, a great experience. So I thought I'd try them out in Europe. Well, MSC has been cruising in Europe for decades. They're well known, and anybody who lives in Europe has heard of MSC and is well aware of their cruises. They're all over the place. They're one of the biggest operators in Europe. But a lot of those ships built decades ago from the early 2000s are still active in Europe and the Mediterranean. And if you book a cruise on MSC without paying attention to which ships you're booking, you could end up on one of these much older, smaller ships without any of the frills and thrills that you find on the big ships they have operating in North America. Many of these older ships, like the Armonia or the Sinfonia, don't even have specialty restaurants. They don't have the space for it. So all you're getting is a buffet and a main dining room and a couple of offshoot stands outside the buffet where they'll give you some burgers and hot dogs or pizza, which is actually really good, but it's nothing like the big ships sailing in North America, and you have to go into it with that kind of expectation. And when you sail on one of these older ships, you're going to find very few Americans and English speakers. Now, there are a handful of them. A lot of them are from the UK. There are some Americans as well, but the ones I spoke to were mostly disappointed. They say the food quality was much poor, and I have to agree, it wasn't the best. It's as if MSC puts on a great show in the US market because they're trying to get people interested in their brand, but they've already conquered the European market, so the effort doesn't seem to be there. And then there's a weird price inversion. If you're booking with MSC in Europe, you're likely to get a much older ship, a smaller ship with a lot less to do on board, and the price is going to be higher than a cruise in the Caribbean on a brand new ship or a newer ship like the MSC Seashore, which you can book a 1-week cruise for under $400 many times, many weeks throughout the year. In Europe, a 1-week cruise on one of these older, smaller ships is easily going to be $800 or more. If I'm going to spend that kind of money on a cruise in Europe, I don't want to be on an older ship. I'd rather spend a little bit more and get on a cruise line like Royal Caribbean or Norwegian or Princess, which sends a lot of ships to Europe for the summer months. And they tend to be a little bit more pricey than MSC, but in my opinion, it's worth it. Now, not all MSC ships are created equal, and there actually are 1 or 2 gems sailing in the European market, but you have to know what to look for, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. But first, let's take a look at some of the other shocks you're going to feel if you get on one of these MSC cruises from a European port. I've been on many cruises in Europe, and there's a huge difference between cruise lines. If you book a European cruise with a Princess or a Norwegian or Royal Caribbean, you're going to get an experience more tailored to Americans because they're booking a lot of Americans on those cruises. Americans know these lines. They've been around forever in the US. But MSC is not like that. They started off as a European company and they market to their European clientele. Now they're trying to drag Americans into this, but in the European marketplace, it hasn't gotten there yet. So if you're booking with MSC on any European cruise, you're not only going to be dealing with a language barrier, meaning that a majority of the passengers are going to speak other languages, but they're going to speak multiple languages. You're going to hear every announcement played in 5 different languages every time. You're going to have shows and entertainment mostly designed to have 0 spoken word because it's difficult to appease 5 different languages. So they're not going to bring on an English-speaking comedian that 80% of the people on the cruise can't get. They're not going to bring on acts like that. Instead, they're focused more on dance, theatrical, and musical shows because music is a bit more universal. And if you're a fan of the typical games and activities that go on during cruises, on MSC cruises in Europe, they take longer, they can be more confusing because the host is trying to communicate to people in 3, 4, 5 different languages depending on who's participating. But there is a very practical reason that MSC uses a lot of these older, smaller ships in Europe. I'm going to get to that next. But first, let me know what you think about entertainment on a cruise ship. Is it a deciding factor on where you book? Put that answer in the comments below. A friend of mine recently did his very first European cruise on the MSC Lyrica, and he said that the hop-on, hop-off format that MSC operates in Europe and the Mediterranean was rather jarring, because as an American, he was used to the fact that everybody gets on at one port, you do a circular cruise, you come back to that same port, everybody gets off. It's that kind of feeling that we're all on this vacation together. You're experiencing it with all the other passengers. And if you're a social person, you might really enjoy that. Well, on these European cruises, it's nothing like that. In Europe, MSC operates on a hop-on, hop-off basis, which means most of the ports have new people getting on and new people getting off. So let's say you board the ship in Genoa. and the next port is Civitavecchia, which is close to Rome, you're going to find that many people are getting off there and new people getting on. And then say the next port is in Messina, you're going to have people getting off there and new people getting on. So the clientele on board the ship is constantly changing. And that prohibits the cruise line from doing the big end of cruise shows or even giving you a feeling of where you are in that cruise. You might have things like a formal night on the first night of your cruise because it's not everybody's first night of their cruise, and they just have to put these nights whenever they see fit. So it's not the same experience. And there's very little sea days involved in European cruises. Most European cruises of 7 days will only have one sea day. Some won't have any, which means you're constantly on and off that ship at all the ports of call. And that's kind of why MSC designed these ships more as just transportation vehicles that you can have a hotel room in. There's not as much to do on board because you're not spending multiple days at sea typically. Now, my friend told me that this format kind of killed that embarkation day energy where everybody's all excited about their cruise starting because he got on board and people had already been on there for 5 days. But there is a bright side or a silver lining to this because when you do board your ship, it's not all that crowded. You get on a lot easier. You're not in lines of thousands of people getting on the ship. You might get on at a port where there's 500 people getting on and the rest have already been on that ship. So when you're getting on and you're heading to the buffet and getting your lunch, it's not going to have that same packed, overcrowded feeling because when you're getting on that ship, all the people who've already been on this cruise for a few days have gotten off at that port to explore the port where you joined the cruise. So it does make embarkation and debarkation go a bit more smoothly because everybody is not getting on and off at the same port. But some of you will love and some of you will absolutely hate this next thing about MSC Cruises in the European market. Okay, now this is not a deal breaker for everybody. It's not a deal breaker for me. But if you're caught off guard, it could almost ruin your vacation. Smoking on MSC ships in Europe is much more liberal. In fact, a lot of these smaller ships have half the pool deck available to smokers, which means if you're trying to enjoy a chair out by the pool, they can't contain that smoke. So if people are smoking in the smoking area, you're likely to experience it in the non-smoking area. Now, they do have many non-smoking areas of the ship, most of them being indoors though. So if you like to be on the outer decks, the pool deck, you're likely to experience other smokers. One of my favorite types of cruises is transatlantic cruises. And you'll find a lot of these on cruise lines like Royal Caribbean, Princess, Norwegian, because they rotate their ships between the American market and the European market. Because the winter and sometimes even the fall and spring in Europe can be very iffy weather, quite cold, rainy. It's not the time most people want to go on a European or a Mediterranean cruise. So cruise lines like Princess, Royal Caribbean, NCL, they all take advantage of this and they rotate their ships. So they'll have more ships in the US market during the winter months because it's still good to go to the Caribbean. The weather's still very nice down there. And then in the summer months, they'll take some of those ships and move them to Europe to do European and Mediterranean cruises. So it's the same ships that you generally get in the Americas that you're going to be on in Europe. They're designed the same way. The staff is used to the American clientele. And historically, there's a lot more Americans booking these cruises than they're booking MSC in Europe. That's why they don't have the same problems. They're still operating mostly English-speaking entertainment. You will find the same type of entertainment over there in Europe that you're going to get in the Caribbean on these cruise lines. MSC is the only cruise line operating under a two-tier fleet strategy where they put most of their premium ships in the American marketplace and their legacy fleet in the European marketplace. This isn't a criticism. It's something you just need to know. Europeans are familiar with this legacy fleet and they continue to book it. And that has been their bulk of business over the past decades. Now they're trying to bring more Americans into their global market and bring them onto their European ships. And one thing that they are starting to do is add a few of these newer, mega nice ships in the European market. I'm going to tell you how to look for that in a minute. Next, I'm going to tell you exactly how you can go right booking an MSC cruise in Europe and how you can get an incredible deal. I'm going to show you a specific example of a premium ship on MSC in the European marketplace. But first, if you would take a minute and hit that like button, subscribe to our channel. It helps us grow and will continue to bring you cruising updates. The bottom line here is book the ship, not the line. If you want a better experience on MSC in Europe, you have to really pay attention to what ship you're booking. If you're booking older ships like the Lyrica, the Sinfonia, the Armonia, these ships were built prior to 2005. They're over 20 years old. They don't have all the modern updates, the thrills and frills, and they're more designed toward the European clientele that is just going from one port to the next and enjoying all the cities in Greece or all the cities around the Mediterranean and not as concerned about the comforts of the cruise ship. And honestly, those cruises are just not as enjoyable as being on a cruise on the MSC World America, for example. But MSC is taking note, and they are starting to introduce some of the more modern mega ships into the European market. They've already started this with the MSC World Europa, and they're coming out this year with the MSC World Asia, which is going to be solely dedicated to the European market. Now, the Europa is going to move back and forth, actually, between the US market and the European market, but they're going to have a dedicated, mega, brand new ship just for Europe. And honestly, if you're going to book MSC, that's the one to book. There's two tricks to use with MSC to tell if the ship is more modern or more vintage. And you can either ask your travel agent or just look this up online if you're considering a ship. Does that ship have specialty restaurants? That's number one, because if they don't, it's definitely a part of that vintage fleet. And the other thing you really want to know is, does that ship have an MSC Yacht Club on board? Not necessarily that you're going to fork over the extra thousands of dollars to book the yacht club, but the ships that have the yacht club are more modern, more current, and a lot more up to date than the ones that don't have that. And frankly, if you're going to book the yacht club, it doesn't matter what ship you're on, you're going to have an incredible experience. And if you're going to book the yacht club, I actually have a whole video on the MSC Yacht Club, which I'm going to link right up here. But those ships that have it in the Mediterranean and in Europe are better ships, and you're going to have an incredible experience. The older fleet, the older ships in their fleet do not even have yacht club on board. Now, if you're going to book a ship like the World Europa or the World Asia in Europe, you are going to pay a little bit more, but that doesn't mean you can't find great deals. For example, the month of January, when the MSC World Asia is a brand new ship, it is going to be operating a circle route in the Mediterranean, and you can book it for under $800 per person for the entire week. Not to mention, that time of year, it's dirt cheap to get a flight round trip from the US to Europe. So if you want to experience that great ship and get to see some of these European cities, remember, they're not beach oriented. You're more there for the history and seeing all the sights. So it doesn't matter if it's a little bit cooler, just wear a jacket. It's usually okay. And this time of year, like in January, as I'm showing you here, you can get incredible deals on MSC on one of their premium ships in Europe. Speaking of deals, we maintain a list of the best cruise deals you can book right now. Just comment deals or click on the deals link in our description and I'll email it to you. So it's not necessarily a mistake booking an MSC cruise in Europe. It's just a mistake booking the wrong ship, which now you know how to avoid. But there are a lot of cruisers cruising Europe and the Mediterranean making some key mistakes. I'll tell you how to avoid those right here.